I let my wife believe I had nothing. I let her kick me out, tell her friends I was a deadbeat, start planning a new life with another man. What she didn't know was that I'd been sitting on a secret worth $2.3 million for 18 months, and I was about to let her find out the hard way. My name is Owen Wayne. I'm 34 years old, a structural engineer by trade, and for 6 years I built my career the slow way, one contract at a time, in a city that never gave me anything I didn't earn. Denver winters taught me patience. My work taught me precision. My marriage taught me how to disappear inside my own house without anyone noticing I was gone. I met Rebecca 8 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I married her a year later believing that love was supposed to feel like sacrifice. I didn't know yet that sacrifice, given long enough without reciprocity, turns into invisibility. That morning started like every other morning that year. Gray light through the kitchen blinds. Coffee dripping too slowly. Rebecca standing by the counter with her arms crossed, already dressed, already decided. I didn't know it yet, but she'd made up her mind 2 days earlier, maybe longer. I just hadn't been paying attention to the signs, the way she'd stopped asking about my day, the way her phone stayed face down on every surface she touched. "You need to leave," she said. No preamble. No warning. I can't keep doing this with someone who has nothing to offer me. I remember setting the coffee pot down carefully, like the room might shatter if I moved too fast. 48 hours, she told me. That's what she gave me. 48 hours to pack 7 years into boxes and get out of a life I'd spent most of my adult years building around her. I didn't argue. I want to be honest about that, because looking back, my silence probably scared her more than anger would have. I just nodded, and something in my chest went quiet and cold, like a switch flipping somewhere I couldn't reach. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that I'd been carrying a secret of my own for 18 months, one that was about to make her 48-hour deadline the biggest mistake of her life. I packed in silence that night, moving through our bedroom like a man cataloging a stranger's life. Rebecca stayed downstairs, on the phone with someone, laughing too loud for a woman who'd just ended her marriage. I found myself in front of the hallway closet, staring at a shoebox I hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside were photographs of my mother, thin and pale in her hospital bed, the year I took a 40% pay cut to work part-time so I could drive her to chemotherapy 3 days a week. Rebecca had called it noble back then. She'd also called it, more than once in the years after, the reason we never got ahead. She never understood that some debts aren't financial. My mother raised me alone after my father left when I was 9, working 2 jobs so I'd never feel the absence of him. When she got sick, there was no question of what I'd do. I lost income, lost momentum, lost 2 years of career growth I never fully recovered from, and Rebecca, in the quiet resentful way she had, made sure I knew she'd noticed the cost. I closed the shoebox and set it in a moving box, and that's when I saw it, tucked behind an old shoe rack, a bank envelope, unopened, my name typed across the front in the sterile font of a wire transfer notification. I'd been avoiding it for 2 days, afraid to look at it and afraid of what looking at it might mean. Downstairs, Rebecca's laughter rose again, sharp and unfamiliar, like she was performing happiness for whoever was on the other end of that call. I stood there in the doorway of a room that no longer felt like mine and thought about the 18 months I'd spent building something in secret, something Rebecca had no idea existed, something that was about to make her 48-hour ultimatum feel like the smallest decision of her life. I picked up the envelope. My hands weren't steady. Whatever was inside, I already knew it was going to change everything. I didn't open it in the house. I carried it to my car, sat behind the wheel in the dark of our driveway, and stared at my own name for a long moment before I finally tore the seal. It was a wire confirmation. $2.3 million, deposited 3 days earlier into an account Rebecca didn't know existed. The first payment from a consulting contract I'd spent a year and a half building in complete silence, structured through an LLC I'd formed under my mother's maiden name specifically so nothing would trace back to our joint finances. I hadn't set out to hide it from her. At first, it was just caution, old habits from watching my mother get blindsided by my father's debts when I was a kid. But somewhere in those 18 months, caution turned into something else. I stopped telling Rebecca about client calls. I stopped mentioning the meetings that ran late. Some part of me, the part that noticed how she'd stopped asking about my day, had already started building a life she wasn't inside of. My phone lit up. A text from Wallace Pruitt, the contractor friend who'd first introduced me to the client 18 months earlier over a beer neither of us expected to turn into anything. Congrats, man. You earned this. Don't let anyone talk you out of what you built. I sat there a long time, the dashboard light casting a pale blue glow across my face, my expression doing nothing at all. Not triumph, not vindication, just a strange, heavy stillness. Somewhere behind me, inside the house, Rebecca was already telling her friends I was gone. Telling them, probably, that she'd finally cut loose the deadbeat who never gave her the life she deserved. I put the car in reverse. I didn't look back at the house. Whatever came next, I understood clearly, sitting in that driveway, that I would be the one writing it, not her. Wallace let me stay in the guest house behind his property without asking a single question, which told me more about real friendship than 7 years of marriage ever had. He'd been the one who vouched for me to the client a year and a half earlier, back when I was still just a structural consultant nobody had heard of outside Denver's engineering circles. He believed in the work before I fully believed in myself, and now, watching me unload boxes into his guest house at 11 at night, he just handed me a beer and said, "You'll be fine. You were always going to be fine." Rebecca called 4 days later. I almost didn't answer. "I'm not trying to be cruel," she said, though her voice carried the particular brightness of someone who wasn't calling to apologize. "I just think it's better this way. For both of us." I asked her what she'd told people. She paused a beat too long. That it wasn't working. That you'd let yourself go, career-wise. People understand that. I didn't correct her. I let her have the story she wanted, the one where she was the woman who'd finally had the courage to leave a man who couldn't provide. I remember feeling something close to pity, though I couldn't yet name why. Maybe because I already knew something she didn't, that the version of me she'd just discarded no longer existed, and the version standing in Wallace's guest house was about to become someone she wouldn't recognize. Before we hung up, she mentioned, almost carelessly, that she'd need me to come by the house soon to collect the rest of my tools. "Whenever's convenient," she said, like she was scheduling a delivery. I told her I'd be there Thursday. I didn't tell her how, or in what, or that Thursday afternoon I had a client meeting scheduled directly after. One that required transportation befitting the 7-figure deal I was about to close. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of Denver afternoon where the mountains disappear behind low cloud cover. I hadn't planned the timing deliberately, the meeting simply fell before my stop at the house, but looking back, I can't say I minded how it landed. The car pulled into our driveway a few minutes past 3, sent by the client's office as part of the day's arrangements, a Rolls-Royce Ghost, black, silent, the kind of car that doesn't announce itself so much as it rearranges the air around it. I stepped out in the suit I'd bought for the meeting, and I saw Rebecca on the porch before she saw me. She was holding a glass of wine, mid-sentence with her friend Colette from next door, laughing about something I'd never know the punchline to. Her eyes moved from the car, to the driver holding the door, to me, and I watched her face do something I hadn't seen in years. Not admiration. Recognition, maybe, of a mistake she hadn't yet let herself name. The wine glass tilted in her hand. She caught it before it fell, but Colette noticed too, and the two of them went quiet in that particular way women go quiet when something doesn't fit the story they've been telling. "Owen," Rebecca said, and her voice had lost its brightness. "What is this?" I told her I was there for my tools. Nothing more. I didn't explain the car, didn't explain the suit, didn't give her a single thread to pull. I walked past her into the garage, gathered what was mine, and loaded it into the trunk while she stood frozen on the porch, watching a version of her husband she'd convinced herself never existed. Before I got back in the car, I looked at her once. "I'll see you around," I said. Nothing more. I got in, and the door closed with a sound like a decision being finalized. I found out what Colette had asked Rebecca 2 days later, and not from Rebecca herself. Wallace's wife, Priya, still kept in touch with people from the old neighborhood, and she called me almost giddy with the story, the way people get when gossip finally has somewhere honest to land. Colette had turned to Rebecca the moment the Rolls-Royce pulled out of the driveway and asked her, flatly, "Who is he really?" And Rebecca, according to Priya, hadn't had an answer. Not because she didn't know who I was, but because she'd spent the last year building an entirely different plan for her life, one that had nothing to do with me at all. That's when the second piece came out. Rebecca had been seeing someone from the boutique where she worked, a man who managed the shop 2 doors down. Nothing physical from what I understood, but emotional, sustained, deliberate. Messages every day for over a year. A shared calendar of coffee meetings disguised as errands. An apartment they'd already toured together, contingent on one simple condition, that I be gone first. I sat with that for a long while after Priya's call ended. It explained things I hadn't let myself examine too closely. The sudden ultimatum, the coldness that had crept into our marriage long before I ever signed the consulting contract, the way Rebecca's dissatisfaction with my finances had always felt sharper than it should have, like it was covering for something else entirely. I wasn't angry, not in the way I expected to be. I was tired, mostly, and a little relieved, the way you feel when a diagnosis finally explains a pain you'd been carrying without a name for it. I thought about my mother again, about the father who left us when I was 9, about the particular quiet cruelty of people who make their exit plans before they tell you the marriage is over. I understood, finally, exactly what kind of ending I was standing inside of. Rebecca called the following week, her voice different now, softer, searching. She asked to meet, and I agreed, mostly out of curiosity about what version of the story she planned to tell me. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop near the old house, and she started slow, the way people do when they're testing how much room they have to maneuver. She said she'd been scared. She said money had never been the real issue, not really, that she'd always believed in me deep down. She reached for my hand across the table, and I let her, for a moment, before I pulled it back. "I know about the apartment," I said. "I know about the messages. I've known for 4 months." Her face went through something complicated. Shock first, then the fast, silent arithmetic of someone recalculating everything they thought they controlled. I told her about the shared iCloud account we'd never bothered to separate, the one that had quietly synced her messages to a device I still had access to. I hadn't gone looking. I'd simply seen a notification one night I wasn't supposed to see, and after that, I couldn't stop seeing. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, and there was real bewilderment in it, like my silence had been a kind of cruelty she hadn't accounted for. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do," I said. "And you gave me 48 hours to leave a house I'd spent 7 years paying for months after you started planning your exit." She didn't have an answer for that. I watched her search for one anyway, watched the calculation behind her eyes shift from damage control to something closer to fear, and I understood that my calm was unsettling her more than any anger could have. I finished my coffee, thanked her for meeting me, and left her sitting there with a silence she'd have to carry home by herself. The divorce paperwork had been filed for 3 weeks by the time Rebecca hired her lawyer, a fact that seemed to surprise her more than it should have. I'd moved quickly and quietly, the same way I'd built the consulting contract. No announcements, no drama, just careful structure laid down in advance of the moment I'd need it. Colorado runs on equitable distribution, not strict 50-50, and my attorney had made sure the consulting LLC was formed, funded, and operating entirely outside our joint finances well before Rebecca ever gave her ultimatum. Separate property, clean paper trail, no coming-led funds. Her lawyer told her, in a conversation Priya later relayed to me secondhand, that she had almost no legal claim to the $2.3 million or anything that came after it. I hadn't done this out of vengeance. I'd done it because of a story my mother told me only once, near the end, when the morphine loosened the things she normally kept locked away. She told me how my father had drained their joint accounts twice before he finally left for good, how she'd learned too late that love without protection is just an invitation to be taken from. She'd built her small bakery business the same way, years later, quietly and separately, so no one could ever do that to her again. I never told Rebecca that story. I'm not sure I could have explained, back when we were happy, why it mattered so much to me. But some part of me had absorbed the lesson anyway, and had been building my own version of my mother's protection for 18 months without fully understanding why. Rebecca's lawyer asked for a delay, then a renegotiation, then finally accepted the numbers as they stood. I signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the same week the aspens along the foothills turned gold, and I remember thinking that some endings arrive so quietly you almost miss the moment they become final. The boutique manager didn't last. I heard through Priya, who by then had become an unlikely and reliable pipeline of information, that he'd gotten cold feet within a month of the divorce filing becoming public. A messy split, apparently, wasn't the arrangement he'd signed up for. He'd wanted the fantasy of Rebecca, not the complicated, expensive reality of her. The apartment they'd toured together never materialized. Rebecca stayed in the house instead, the one we'd bought together 9 years earlier, now carrying a mortgage that had been built around 2 incomes. Mine was gone. Hers alone couldn't cover it, not with the boutique's modest hours and no consulting windfall to lean on. Priya told me Rebecca had started looking into refinancing, then a roommate, then finally, quietly, a for sale sign that went up in March. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I want to be honest about that. I felt the particular flatness of watching consequences unfold exactly the way structural math predicts they will. Not satisfying, just accurate. I'd spent my career learning that buildings fail in ways you can calculate in advance if you understand the load-bearing points. Marriages, I was learning, aren't so different. Wallace asked me once, over beers on his porch, if I regretted not telling Rebecca about the contract before she gave her ultimatum. I thought about it longer than he expected me to. No, I told him. If I'd told her, I'd never have found out who she really was underneath the money question. The money was never the real issue. It was just the excuse she needed. He nodded slowly, like that tracked with everything he'd already suspected about her. Outside, the light was going gold over the mountains, and for the first time in months, I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't grief and wasn't anger. Just the quiet, unremarkable feeling of a door finally closing all the way. A year later, I stood on the balcony of a new apartment on the 18th floor. Downtown Denver spread out below me in a grid of amber streetlights. The consulting business had grown past anything I'd projected that first year. 2 new contracts, a small team, an office with my name on the lease instead of hidden behind an LLC formed under my mother's maiden name. I thought about her often, still, in the quiet moments. Not with grief exactly, but with a kind of retrospective clarity, the understanding that she'd have been proud not of the money, but of the fact that I'd finally learned to protect what I built, the way she'd had to learn it herself, decades earlier, from a man who taught her the hard way. I wasn't thinking about Rebecca much anymore, either. The house had sold in the spring. She'd moved into an apartment across town, and Priya mentioned once, carefully, that she seemed to be doing okay, all things considered. I didn't wish her harm. I'd stopped needing to. My phone buzzed on the railing beside me. An unknown number, a text. "Hi Owen. It's Rebecca. New number. I know it's been a while, but I was hoping we could talk sometime. No pressure." I looked at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking where a reply might have gone. Then I set the phone face down on the railing and looked back out at the city instead, at the lights strung out along streets I'd walked as a man with nothing, and now walked as someone else entirely. I didn't reply that night. I'm not sure I ever will. That wasn't the last time she'd reach out. But it was the last time it would matter. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment for more interesting stories.